In late 1944, after a harrowing hour-long chase through the Surigao Strait under relentless assault from Japanese aircraft, the three brand-new American Sumner-class destroyers reached their target, Ormoc Bay. Already battered by a barrage from their aerial adversaries, these destroyers stormed one of the most heavily fortified ports in the Pacific theater. It was as close as the Americans would get to a full-blown kamikaze mission. Their orders were stark: annihilate as many enemy ships, military assets, supply depots, and personnel as possible. The state-of-the-art American ships faced an unprecedented onslaught of enemy fire upon arrival. The Japanese unleashed their entire arsenal, plunging the destroyers into a maelstrom of attacks from shore, sea, air, and beneath the waves. If the destroyers' armor held just a bit longer, they would wreak havoc at the port. But fate had other plans. A well-aimed torpedo from a Japanese submarine struck true. American sailor Earl H. Taylor had just begun to load a gun when he heard a dull thud followed by someone screaming, quote, "We've been hit!" The detonation ripped open USS Cooper amid a towering column of fire and black smoke. The power failed and the lights went out. Taylor and hundreds of other sailors fought to abandon the ship as they had been ordered. Twisted metal and surging water engulfed her crew. Yet, many remained manning their posts, firing her guns until the very second she was swallowed by the sea. One American destroyer was lost, but two remained, and their crews were determined not to falter. The Battle of Ormoc Bay was about to take the Pacific theater of war by storm. It had been nearly a month since the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, and the situation on the hotly contested island of Leyte in the Philippines remained on a knife edge. The United States had clawed out a foothold on the eastern half of Leyte, yet the Japanese were doubling down, pouring reinforcements and supplies into their beleaguered defenders in a desperate attempt to maintain control of the island at any cost. The struggle morphed into a fierce showdown between two determined generals driven by unyielding resolve and towering egos. On one side, the Japanese High Command was leaning hard on General Tomoyuki Yamashita, urging him to defend Leyte as if it were his own backyard. A loss here would unravel the Japanese grip on the Philippines. On the flip side, General Douglas MacArthur was hell-bent on fulfilling his bold promise to the Filipinos. He was ready to unleash the full might of the American military to liberate the archipelago and send the Japanese scrambling back into the Northwest Pacific. Initially, American forces were misled by intercepted messages, cracked through the recently broken Purple Code, which suggested a large-scale Japanese retreat from Leyte. However, it soon became clear that the Japanese were not pulling out, but were, in fact, ramping up their resupply efforts in a massive push, centered on Ormoc Bay. After months of trying to stem the relentless flow of fresh troops and material, the US finally pinpointed a target that could break the back of the Japanese effort if taken out. Ironically, General Yamashita believed that the United States Navy had taken heavy losses and that the Allied ground forces might be vulnerable to a counterstrike. Thus, he continued to bolster his troop strength. Meanwhile, MacArthur was reinforcing his presence in the region, convinced that smashing the Japanese stronghold at Ormoc Bay would cut off their supply lines and secure Leyte for the Allies. Both military masterminds were sure the tide was turning in their favor, setting the stage for a brutal and decisive confrontation at Ormoc Bay. Describing Ormoc Bay as heavily fortified barely scratches the surface. The port was ensnared in an extensive military web, including relentless air patrols, far-reaching coastal batteries, a robust presence of shore troops, and a fleet of Japanese destroyers and submarines, primed for a swift retaliation in case of an attack. Further complicating the assault, Ormoc was accessible only through two narrow channels, one in the northwest and another in the south, both too shallow for anything larger than a destroyer to navigate. The Northwest Channel was clenched in enemy hands, while the southern was booby-trapped with mines at its most constricted segment. If General MacArthur were to seize this port, he'd have to do so without the firepower of his capital ships. Facing intense pressure from General MacArthur to cut off Japanese reinforcements, Vice Admiral James L. Kaufman, newly appointed commander of the Philippine Sea Frontier, made his move. On November 27, 1944, he ordered the minesweepers USS Pursuit and USS Revenge to clear the Kanagawa Channel, a task that seemed the only clear-cut solution. With the mines swept in the ensuing days, American forces launched 2 raids into the bay. On both occasions, the American destroyers encountered no Japanese naval forces docked, nor any significant military activity. During one mission, USS Waller, supported by a PBY Catalina spotting aircraft, charged into the port unchallenged and unleashed a barrage from its main guns. Remarkably, the response was muted. Soon after, the Catalina spotted a Japanese submarine surfacing nearby, and USS Waller didn't hesitate to engage. A blistering battle erupted, but the surfaced submarine was no match for the destroyer's firepower and was swiftly dispatched to the sea's depths. On 2 other raids, American PT boats and destroyers breached the bay, inflicted damage, and even sank a Japanese transport ship nearing the port, yet they still encountered minimal naval activity. Everything shifted the next day when Kaufman received an urgent tip-off from air reconnaissance about a substantial congregation of enemy ships in the port. The moment Kaufman and MacArthur had been waiting for had finally arrived. In the nick of time, Destroyer Squadron 60 docked at the Ulithi Atoll anchorage, now reinforcing the 7th Fleet. This squadron boasted 7 newly minted Sumner-class destroyers, highly anticipated by the commander of Destroyer Force Pacific Fleet, Comdespac. The US Navy was eager to test the mettle of these new Sumners in combat, primarily as shipyards were rolling out 1 every 2 weeks, committing the Navy to their use for the duration of the war. These Sumners stood apart from modern US destroyers, typically featuring only 2 forward 5-inch gun mounts. The Sumners, however, sported 4. They were also the first destroyers equipped with twin rudders, allowing for sharper, quicker turns, an essential advantage in the tight confines of Ormoc Bay. On December 2nd, Commander Zahm was summoned aboard the flagship USS Portland, moored in San Pedro Bay. There, Vice Admiral Kaufman handed him a secret classified dispatch, CTG 02356, ordering him to lead his 3 ships, USS Allen M. Sumner, DD 692, USS Cooper, DD 695, and USS Mole, DD 693, into Ormoc Bay at midnight. His mission was clear: engage and destroy any enemy vessels and wreak havoc on the docks and warehouses. The paint was practically fresh on their hulls, and while only about 15% of Zahm's crew had tasted combat before, the rest were green, relying purely on their training and grit. Barely 15 minutes after setting out, a swarm of Japanese fighters tore through the clouds, raining down fire on the American destroyers. Although 1 enemy plane was shot down, the squadron continued to face relentless harassment as they charged toward their objective. By 11 p.m., the alarm sounded again as another wave of enemy aircraft swooped in. A bomber's close pass riddled Sumner's starboard side with 90 holes, igniting a fire and marking it as a vulnerable target. The assault was relentless, with attacks hammering the ships every 3 to 4 minutes. Despite the damage, the 3 destroyers pressed forward, reaching the port around midnight on December 6th. As they breached Ormoc Bay, they were met with an overwhelming barrage of enemy fire from all directions. American sailor Earl H. Taylor remembers tense movement when the destroyers pierced into the port. Quote, "We were ordered to enter Western Leyte's Ormoc Bay and destroy Japanese ships carrying reinforcements to the port of Ormoc. We arrived in the bay shortly before midnight and made immediate radar contact with the enemy. The order came to commence firing. Japanese fast PT boats swarmed, coastal batteries opened up from the shores, and the persistent enemy aircraft continued their fierce engagement. The Americans faced off against an entrenched and determined foe in the heart of Ormoc Bay. Functioning like a well-oiled machine, the 3 destroyers unleashed synchronized salvos at a Japanese transport ship caught mid-disembarkation. The overwhelming firepower proved too much for the vessel, which burst into flames and began to sink rapidly. Many Japanese servicemen never reached the shore, with some leaping into the sea to escape the inferno. After dispatching the transport, the destroyers turned their guns on several supply depots and cranes lining the docks. It wasn't long before they spotted the Japanese destroyer Kiyue attempting a surprise flank. Without hesitation, the American destroyers pooled their firepower, quickly sending the Kiyue to the bottom before it could escape their guns' range. The Sumner-class destroyers were proving their mettle, and victory seemed within grasp. However, the Japanese were not out of tricks yet. Numerous submarines and destroyers, previously hugging the coast to evade radar detection, now surged forward, unleashing a barrage of gunfire and torpedoes at the American ships. Suddenly, a torpedo struck USS Cooper, tearing a massive hole in her side. Torpedo officer Douglas Campbell later recounted the harrowing moment. Quote, "When the Cooper was hit with that shuddering thud, I was on the bridge. I was immediately propelled into the water and felt myself being dragged down. I then realized that I was tied to the ship by my sound-powered phone line. Fortunately, I had a sharp knife strapped to my belt, and it came in handy freeing me. I shot toward the surface and came up amid burning debris and oil." The battle raged on, with both sides inflicting and enduring heavy casualties, as the night sky above Ormoc Bay lit up with the fire of war, and USS Cooper was on fire. Earl H. Taylor was furiously loading gun number 1, his actions a frenzy of precision when utter chaos erupted around him. Fire and smoke billowed as if conjured by an unseen hand, engulfing the scene in chaos. Commander Mel Peterson's voice cut through the turmoil within heartbeats. Quote, "Abandon ship!" Taylor's recounting of the harrowing escape paints a vivid picture of USS Cooper's claustrophobic corridors choked with desperate sailors. Now a maelstrom of fear and confusion, the ship shook violently as its crew scrambled for safety. Making matters worse, the power suddenly failed, plunging the vessel into an eerie, suffocating darkness, punctuated only by the ship's spine-chilling metallic groans under the merciless assault. Taylor had planned a swift escape to the deck, intending to scale the ladder through the gun mount and leap into the ocean's uncertain embrace. Yet, the situation was growing more dire by the second. The Cooper, wounded gravely, listed dangerously to starboard, its tilt so severe that seawater gushed through the escape hatch like the rapids of a burst dam. In the pitch black, Taylor groped his way to an unconventional exit, a hatch used to eject scalding shells. Clambering through this narrow escape, he plummeted approximately 15 feet into the raging sea below. Submerged deeply, Taylor grappled with the violent waters, his body colliding with a cold, unyielding stanchion. Above him, the night sky erupted in a terrifying spectacle of explosions and tracer fire. The relentless barrage from Japanese shore batteries illuminated the chaos in ghastly flashes of light. Unbeknownst to him, Cooper was succumbing rapidly to the sea's depths. Miraculously, Taylor's hand found purchase on a ladder rung attached to Mount Number 2, clinging desperately as the waters rose to claim him. Amidst the chaos, he could hear the agonized cries of trapped men, their pleas to the heavens. Quote, "Please God save us, have mercy upon us." Reflecting on their plight, Taylor's heart ached. Quote, "Poor souls, they're some really good buddies, what a hell of a way to die." In less than a minute, USS Cooper was swallowed by the sea, dragging dozens of American sailors into their graves. Those who survived, like Taylor, battled furiously against the lethal cocktail of floating oil, leaping flames and debris, while a brutal naval battle unfurled around them. Engaged in a brutal fight for survival, the other American ships continued their onslaught, unable to lend aid, their guns roaring in a desperate bid to silence the Japanese coastal artillery and warships hell-bent on their destruction. USS Allen M. Sumner and USS Mull bore the brunt of a blistering assault, marking this fierce engagement as the only sea battle of the war where the enemy unleashed its full arsenal at US warships. These included naval guns, torpedoes, aerial bombardments, submarine attacks, coastal batteries, and deadly mines. At the stroke of 12:33 a.m., the battered destroyers received orders to pull back from the bay. Although the Japanese declared a victory, the American ships had inflicted heavy casualties, sinking several enemy vessels and decimating numerous military assets. This disruption severely crippled a vital supply operation, diminishing the Japanese foothold in the region. Meanwhile, USS Cooper's survivors faced a dire struggle. While some remained amidst the wreckage, others, driven by desperation, tried to swim to the safety of nearby shores. Among them, Taylor faced a tumultuous ordeal. Without a life jacket and battling the powerful pull of the sinking ship, he was dragged into the depths. In this moment of despair, Lieutenant John Orr, despite being temporarily blinded by a head injury, miraculously found Taylor and offered him a life-saving life jacket. Together with others who joined them, they embarked on a perilous swim toward the enemy-held shore. Clinging to a makeshift floater net, they even rescued a shipmate paralyzed from the waist down. What initially seemed a feasible escape to nearby Leyte Island quickly turned into a struggle against the odds. With Japanese boats and submarines nearly upon them, their plight seemed hopeless until a sudden tropical squall swept in, concealing them from the enemy's gaze and allowing them to inch closer to safety on the shore. After enduring a grueling 14-hour swim, Taylor and his fellow survivors made landfall, where they were warmly welcomed by the local Filipino community. These villagers offered immediate assistance and shelter, becoming invaluable allies in their time of need. Taylor and the others soon linked up with a band of well-armed locals, led by a former American Army sergeant, actively resisting the Japanese occupation. It would be several agonizing weeks before Taylor and his companions were finally rescued from the island. For those survivors who had not managed to swim ashore, salvation came on December 4th in the form of 2 consolidated PBY Catalina flying boats. The Catalina pilots, deeply affected by the sailors' harrowing experiences, were adamant about leaving no man behind. Knowing that any leftover gear could compromise their escape, pilots dumped non-essential items from their aircraft and urged the survivors to do likewise. Even their footwear wasn't spared. Pushing the limits, each Catalina squeezed in up to 59 sailors, vastly overloading the planes. The pilots worried the overloaded craft might not lift off as takeoff loomed. They resolved that, if necessary, they would make the entire journey skimming the ocean's surface. Miraculously, the Catalinas managed to take flight, rescuing the beleaguered sailors from further peril. The audacious pilots who orchestrated this daring rescue were later honored with medals, recognizing their bravery and steadfast resolve. Zam's mission, while costly, proved devastatingly effective against the enemy. The loss of hundreds of sailors and a destroyer was a harsh price, but the damage inflicted on the Japanese and their ability to reinforce Leyte was incalculable. General Douglas MacArthur prepared his next strategic move to seize the momentum from Zam's mission. On the evening of December 6, 1944, the 77th Division, comprising some 8,000 soldiers, embarked on various small landing craft. Under the night cloak, they skirted Leyte's southern rim, arriving at Ormoc Bay by the break of dawn. The troops landed at Deposito, a small village 5 miles south of Ormoc City, positioning themselves behind enemy lines. The US forces launched a massive combined amphibious and aerial operation to strike the Japanese when they were most vulnerable. Meanwhile, the 7th Infantry Division pressed forward from the south along the coastline, and the 11th Airborne Division descended from the north toward Ormoc City. In response to Zam's earlier operation, General Tomoyuki Yamashita had scrambled to fortify the bay and the area surrounding Ormoc City, with close to 40,000 Japanese troops now stationed there. However, these forces were disorganized, depleted and hampered by severely damaged infrastructure, rendering them largely ineffective in their defensive efforts. Subsequent Japanese attempts to resupply their positions failed, and American forces soon secured both Ormoc Bay and the city itself. The rapid and overwhelming defeat of Japanese forces in the region led to a humiliating blunder. A sizable Japanese transport convoy unwittingly sailed into Ormoc port on the night of Sunday, December 12th, unaware that the Americans had taken control. The ensuing chaos was catastrophic. As the ramp lowered and Japanese soldiers began to disembark, they were met with fierce resistance. Within an hour, all but one of the approximately 750 soldiers were down. The sole survivor was found a week later, hidden in the ship's crow's nest. The next day, US Army Air Corps planes obliterated the remaining 6 transport ships anchored in the port. With the fall of Leyte imminent, the Japanese had lost their logistical upper hand. MacArthur was now one step closer to dismantling the Japanese presence in the Philippines and fulfilling his vow made during the dark days of the Bataan Death March.